The French Quarter isn't just the oldest part of New Orleans, it's the city's soul, bottled and aged in equal parts beauty, chaos, and contradiction. These streets have seen it all. Empires rise and fall, pirates plot, and preachers pray. Beignets served with powdered sugar, and justice served with a shaky hand. From the market stalls of Decatur streets to the shadowy courtyards behind charters, the Quarter tells its story in stone and song. French Quarter Tales is a guided wander through the layered past. You'll meet Sicilian grocers who invented iconic sandwiches, nuns who braved storms and swamps to teach girls in a godforsaken colony, and revolutionaries, some with flags, others with fire. You'll pass through plazas where nations traded land like poker chips, and down side streets where ghosts still linger. This is not a history book, it's a conversation with the past, raw, rich, and always alive. Welcome to the French Quarter.
The French Market is the oldest public market in the United States, with roots stretching back further than the official 1791 construction date. Originally a Native American trading post near the Mississippi River, it evolved under the French and then the Spanish rule into a bustling open-air market. The Spanish formalized its layout in the late 18th century, building covered arcades for vendors selling produce, seafood, and especially meat. Alright, so here's the question. If it was built by the Spanish in 1790s, why is it called the French Market? Very simple. When Louisiana became part of the United States, a new neighborhood was born just upriver from the French Quarter. It's called the Central Business District, or the Warehouse District, but back then it was known as the American Zone, the American Quarter. So therefore, the Americans lived on one side of Canal Street, the French lived on the other. And where did the French do their shopping? At that market where the old Native American trading post used to be. Therefore, it was the French Market. In the 19th century, the market reflected the city's growing diversity. African, French, Spanish, Italian, German, and Caribbean influences filled the air in the form of languages, spices, and street food. Among the most enduring of these were the Sicilian immigrants who arrived in large numbers in the late 1800s. Many found their place in the market as fruit and vegetable vendors, transforming its day-to-day character. Banana carts, garlic stalls, and citrus stands became as much a part of the landscape as oysters and beignets. Sicilian families worked the stalls for generations, embedding their culture into the rhythm and flavor of the place. So how did the Sicilians get to New Orleans? Well, by boat, but it all starts with the Civil War. The Civil War freed the enslaved African Americans. So the Louisiana sugar planters were looking around for another source of cheap labor, and they found it in Sicily. They encouraged the immigration of young Sicilian men to come over and work in the sugar fields. The young Sicilian men who were working in the sugar fields went back to Sicily, got their families, moved back to Louisiana, settled around the French market, and they were very active in the grocery trade. Street vendors, stall owners, shop owners. In 1906, a Sicilian immigrant named Salvatore Lupo opened Central Grocery. The Sicilian workers in the French market would come over to Lupo's store and buy muffaletta bread, which is a Sicilian type of bread. They would cut it open and put meat, cheese, and olive salad on it, eat it for lunch. Salvatore, being the smart man that he was, saw this, decided he would save him the trouble. So he started making muffaletta sandwiches. Cut that bread in half, put the meat, the cheese, the olive salad, close it up, press it a little bit, put it back in the muffaletta wrapper. Sell it to the Sicilians working in the French market. Therefore, our beloved muffaletta sandwich was born. So, we have Central Grocery and Salvatore Lupo to thank for that delicious sandwich. Through the 20th century, the market transitioned from a traditional food market into more of a cultural and tourist destination. After major renovations in the 1970s and again in the 1990s and early 2000s, and now hosts artists and vendors, souvenir stands, food stalls, and events, all echoing its century-long origins as a place where New Orleans comes to trade, eat, and celebrate life. Jackson Square is the heart of the French Quarter, a stage of Spanish ironwork and colonial echoes, where artists, musicians, and performers gather beneath the bronze gaze of Andrew Jackson. But before it was a tourist icon, it was a military parade ground called the Plaza des Armes, laid out by French engineer Adrien de Pajot in 1721 as the city's civic and religious center. The Spanish took over in 1762, rebuilding the square and its surroundings after the fires of 1788 and 1794, with brick, stucco, and wrought iron, shaping the quarter's enduring character. Alright, I got a tale to tell you, and it happened right here in Jackson Square. But first, we're going to need a little backstory, and no better to tell us than the Marquis de Lafayette himself.
I am reminded of all the important events that have occurred here. Most notably, when America became the next world power. Of course, I speak of that great purchase that was done not by me, but alas by another Frenchman known as Napoleon. In 1803, of course, it was decided that the Louisiana Territory and this great city of Nouvelle-Orléans would be sold. For the French under Bonaparte were concerned that the English would simply sail into this great city and take it for themselves. Voice your opinions, my dear. But of course it was not to be. Bonaparte tried to negotiate with the Americans, first requesting $21 million, of which President Jefferson said that is not possible. We do not have the funds. It was dropped to 19, then to 17, and finally to $15 million, not only for Nouvelle-Orléans, but all of the Louisiana Territory. And Bonaparte agreed. He said,
Now, how did France get Louisiana back from Spain anyway? Well, it all has to do with a secret treaty. It was the Treaty of San Ildefonso. France was looking to buy, Spain was looking to sell. And what did the Spanish get for Louisiana? They got a little kingdom in Italy for the Spanish king's son-in-law. You know how them son-in-laws are. Now, Napoleon was a man of great ambition, and he sought to have a new world empire where the king of France had failed, but first he was going to have to get Saint Domingue back, and that's modern-day Haiti. Now, there had been a revolution there in which the French had been thrown out. He sent an army to take Haiti back, but it was decimated by the Haitians and yellow fever. And seeing that he could no longer have the island of Haiti, he no longer needed Louisiana. So he was looking to sell. And President Thomas Jefferson, as our favorite fighting Frenchman just pointed out, was looking to buy. So the deal got done, and on December 30th, 1803, right here in Jackson Square, the Spanish flag went down, the French flag went up. Just a few minutes later, that French flag went down, and the United States flag went up, and we became a world power. In 1851, the square was renamed Jackson Square to honor the hero of the 1815 Battle of New Orleans, symbolizing a shift from colonial roots to American pride. Once a site of executions and proclamations, the square was transformed in the 19th century into a public garden. By the 1920s, artists began selling their work along its fences, turning the square into the city's open-air art gallery. That creative tradition continues alongside jazz bands, tarot card readers, and second liners. Designated a National Historic Landmark in 1960, Jackson Square remains a living crossroads of history and culture, still beating, still telling its story in brushstrokes and brass bands. Lafitte's blacksmith shop at 341 Bourbon is one of New Orleans' oldest buildings, constructed between 1772 and 1791 in the French colonial Creole cottage style by carpenter and owner Nicolas Touzy. Like many structures of its time, it was built using the briquette en tout poteau, a traditional method where bricks were set between cypress posts, then covered in stucco to protect against the humid Gulf climate. Touzy later traded this structure to Marguerite Robert, daughter of Bartholomew Robert, a native of Bordeaux, France. Marguerite Robert was also the wife of Simon de Roche. In 1833, Marguerite, then a widow, sold the property to the widow of Dr. Christian Miltenberger. Now, Dr. Christian Miltenberger was a French-born physician who had fled Saint-Domingue during the Haitian Revolution and had settled in New Orleans by 1809. He was renowned for his expertise in treating yellow fever. He established a medical practice on Wall Street and became a prominent figure in the city. He and his wife, Marie-Aimée Messer, whose family had owned coffee plantations also on Saint-Domingue, also held property in other areas of the French Quarter. In fact, in Louisiana, which brings us back, as most things in the French Quarter do, to Bourbon Street. 941 Bourbon Street is best known for its association, or lack thereof, with our own personal pirate, Jean Lafitte. Now, it's been rumored, though never proven, that Jean and Pierre Lafitte used this site for their pirate and smuggling operations back in the day. There is no historical record that any of this ever happened. But if it did, it goes all the way back to Marguerite Roberts, whose husband, if you remember, was Simon de Roche, who was known as the Castilian. Oral tradition suggests that this de Roche, the Castilian, was an associate of Jean Lafitte's, and therefore Marguerite would have known him and maybe leased it out to him. Maybe our notorious pirate here was just trying to help a poor widow out. The historian in me rejects if there is any link between the pirates and the blacksmith shop, because it's not based on a primary source. Now the anthropologist says don't dismiss oral tradition quickly. So it may have, or it may not have, depending on who you ask, which makes it one of the most French Quarter things ever. Now this we know for certain. In the 1940s, Roger, Tom, he has an AKA too, Kaplinger revived the abandoned structure as Café Lafitte, a bohemian bar popular with artists and the gay community. After a 1953 lease dispute, because again, this is the French Quarter, Kaplinger opened Café Lafitte in Exile nearby. Now, Café in Exile, again, depending upon who you talk to, because again, this is New Orleans, claims to be the oldest continuing operating gay bar in the United States, which is very historically significant. Alright, back to bourbon, which is an absolutely fantastic rallying cry. Okay, today, the original shop operates as a bar, and it's known for its historic charm and haunted reputation, because of course it has ghosts. It earned the National Historic Landmark status in 1970. The old Ursuline convent at 1114 Charter Street is the oldest surviving building in New Orleans and the Mississippi Valley, a testament to resilience and faith. Built in 1752 for the Ursuline nuns who arrived from France in 1727, it became a hub of education, healthcare, and religious instruction in colonial New Orleans. The Ursulines' trip across the Atlantic in 1727 was no pleasure cruise. It would take the Ursulines almost 5 months to travel from France to New Orleans. There were 12 sisters who set out on the journey. One was an elderly nun. One was a very young novice. The rest were in their 20s and 30s. Their mission was to bring education, healthcare, and religious instruction to a young, unstable colony on the edge of the known world. It took great courage and devotion to God to leave everything they had ever known behind and set out into what to them must have been unimaginable. It was a brutal, prolonged ordeal. They were plagued by storms, illness, and the constant threat of being attacked by pirates. The conditions aboard ship were extremely harsh. They had cramped quarters, very little fresh food, and almost no privacy. They faced rough seas, strict discipline, and long days of sheer boredom. But they overcame it all with humor and with faith in their God and in their mission. They made makeshift chapels in the hull of the ship where they said Mass, and they comforted and nursed their fellow passengers and the crew. When they reached the mouth of the Mississippi, their journey was not over. It was almost as hazardous to go from the mouth of the passes to the city of New Orleans as it was to go from France to the Mississippi. It was August when they arrived. It would certainly have been hotter than anything they would have ever experienced back in France. And anyone spending a summer in New Orleans knows there is the constant buzz of biting flies and stinging mosquitoes. They were rowed upstream by enslaved Africans. Often they would hit a sandbank or other hazard, and they would be picked up and carried from one pirogue to the other. It took days to make their way upriver, and when they got to the city, there was no great welcome. All they found waiting for them was rude wooden shacks, muddy streets, and the hard work ahead of them. And as soon as they hit the ground, they hit the ground running. They started to work immediately, teaching, nursing, and sheltering those in need. They brought order into a world that had only known chaos, compassion in a world that had only known indifference. They were the light in a world that had only known darkness. They had left the comforts of Europe behind them, but they laid the foundations for Catholic education and healthcare in Louisiana. Their voyage was a declaration of purpose, and their landing marked the quiet beginning of something very revolutionary. 12 brave and determined women reshaping the city from its roots up. These women taught girls of all backgrounds, white, black, Native American, free or slave. They ran the first hospital, and they chronicled their entire work in letters sent back to Europe that still gives us a rare insight into the early life in the colony. The convent itself has survived fires, floods, wars, and changing empires. Later, nowadays, it has become a museum. Today it stands as a living monument to Catholic heritage, female leadership, and the enduring spirit of New Orleans. At the corner of Charters and Wilkinson, just a block upriver from Jackson Square, stands the Bosquet House, a weathered survivor of empire, revolution, and catastrophe. Today, it's home to the Flirty Girl, where tourists and locals alike can shop for unique New Orleans items and t-shirts. But beneath the paint and plaster lies a story that spans the fall of New Orleans' French roots, the rise of Spanish order, and a blaze that nearly erased the French Quarter from the map. In the late 1770s, this lot, 619 Charter Street, was owned by a very important man, Don Bernardo de Galvez, Spanish governor of Louisiana and a crucial but often overlooked hero of the American Revolution. Galvez wasn't fighting for independence per se, he was just fighting the British, which made him a natural ally to the rebels up the Mississippi River. While Washington was freezing at Valley Forge, Galvez was launching swamp-soaked campaigns to kick the British out of the Gulf. He captured Baton Rouge, Mobile, Pensacola, funneled supplies up the Mississippi to the Continental Army, and turned New Orleans into a covert base of operations for American smugglers, spies, and privateers. Galvez wasn't just a general, he was a man of property, and one of those properties was the very lot that would become the Bosquet House. In 1787, the year before the fire would remake the city, he sold it to Don Vincent Jose Nunez, treasurer of the Spanish Army in Louisiana. And that's where the trouble began. On Good Friday, 1788, Don Nunez's home caught fire, reportedly from a candle on a home altar. Because bells were forbidden to ring on holy days, no warning was given. What started as a flickering flame turned into a firestorm. The quarter at the time was made of dry timber and tar,
and cedar shingles primed to ignite. When the wind rose, it didn't blow, it howled. In less than a day, 856 buildings were reduced to rubble. The parish church, the cabildo, rows of homes and shops, all gone. Only a handful of structures, like the Ursuline convent, survived the fire. In the charred aftermath, Governor Esteban Rodriguez Miro didn't just rebuild, he imposed strict new codes. Tile roofs instead of cedar shingles, stucco and brick instead of wood, courtyards to isolate fires, and no more overhanging wooden galleries. The New Orleans we know today, with its wrought iron thick walls and Spanish symmetry, it was a city built from that fire. Into this new order came Bartholomew Bosque, a Mallorcan merchant who understood both trade and survival. In 1795, he built a townhouse that still stands on the lot Galvez once owned and Nunez once lost to flame. It was fireproof, functional, and elegant. Commercial space on the ground floor, family living quarters above. His daughter, Suzette Baquet, later married William C.C. Claiborne, Louisiana's first American governor. The house, like the city, bridged two eras. The Basque House is now one of the oldest townhouses in the French Quarter. It has stood through revolution, regime change, natural disaster, and reinvention. Today, it may sell some badass t-shirts, but its bones hold the memory of a city forced to burn before it could rise into itself. Pierre Lemoyne d'Iberville reclaimed the lower Mississippi River Valley for France, paving the way for the creation of New Orleans. He was born in 1661 in Ville Marie, which is present-day Montreal, New France. D'Iberville was the third of 11 sons in a legendary Canadian family. He cut his teeth navigating icy waters and battling the British in Hudson Bay, earning a fierce reputation as a naval tactician and a colonial warrior. In 1699, he led the first major French expedition to colonize the Gulf Coast, establishing Fort Maurepas near present-day Ocean Springs, Mississippi. This was France's first permanent settlement in the region, and the start of a chain of forts and outposts that would shape the future of the American South. While d'Iberville didn't found New Orleans himself, that honor goes to his younger brother, Jean-Baptiste Lemoyne Sire de Bienville. In 1718, he charted the course. In 1699, d'Iberville sailed up the Mississippi River, just past the future site of New Orleans, likely reaching as far as present-day Baton Rouge, before turning around and coming back. He confirmed La Salle's earlier claim, and recognized the river delta's strategic importance for controlling the continent's interior. His maps and journals laid the groundwork for the city's eventual founding 2 decades later. D'Iberville was no mere explorer. He was a naval officer, privateer, and empire builder, famous for leading brutal, effective raids during King William's War and Queen Anne's War. His campaigns from Canada to the Caribbean expanded France's reach and rattled its rivals. Iberville died far from the muddy banks of the Mississippi. In 1706, while preparing a new expedition from Havana, Cuba, he succumbed to yellow fever, one of the many tropical diseases that stalked European ambitions in the New World. He was only 45, but his legacy endures. Without Iberville's vision and ferocity, there may have never been a French Louisiana. No Bienville, no Bourbon Street, no New Orleans. His name lives on in Iberville Street, which stretches along the northern edge of the French Quarter. Originally known as Custom House in the colonial period, Iberville formed the northern boundary of the original 1721 French grid.
This made it a kind of a back edge of town, a transitional zone between the refined residential core of the quarter and the less orderly, later developing neighborhoods. During the 19th century, Iberville developed a mixed reputation. It was home to warehouses, boarding houses, and small businesses, but also to some of the city's seedier entertainments, especially as it approached the notorious red light district of Storyville. By the early 20th century, Iberville became a cultural dividing line. Tourists ventured down from Canal Street, but locals knew the deeper, older stories of the French Quarter began here. Today, Iberville marks the boundary between the high-energy commerce of Canal Street and the slower, more historic rhythms of the French Quarter. Like the man, it's a street of thresholds, between eras, between respectability and revelry, between New Orleans as it was imagined by its founders and what it became.
Right behind St. Louis Cathedral, you got St. Anthony's Garden, tucked away like a shy kid at the family reunion. At first glance, it's just a quiet little slice of greenery in a city full of loud stories. But don't let the modesty fool you. This spot's packing history so old, it makes the cathedral itself look like a newcomer. Archaeologists just recently dug up remnants of a palmetto thatched hut right there in the garden. And here's the kicker. It wasn't French, Spanish, or even Creole. It was Native American. That's right. The oldest known structure in the French Quarter didn't come with a powdered wig or colonial accent. It's a remnant of the people who were here long before the Europeans showed up, acting like the first guests at a potluck dinner. Tribes like the Choctaw, Homa, and Chichimacha used this land way back in the day. And they weren't just sitting around talking about the weather either. This was a hub for trade, sure, skins, pottery, all that. But it was also about something bigger, building relationships. These folks weren't just bartering, they were weaving together a community, one exchange at a time. It was about respect, balance, and keeping the wheels turning, not just for survival, but for thriving. And now, St. Anthony's Garden stands there like a little green time capsule, whispering the truth about where it all started. It's a tribute, not to colonial grandeur or Catholic pomp, but to the native roots that were here long before anybody thought to call this place New Orleans. It's like the land itself refuses to let us forget the real story. Clay Shaw's story is carved into the walls of the French Quarter, written not in court records or conspiracy theories, but in brick and wrought iron, in quiet courtyards and creaking shutters. A decorated World War II veteran, a sophisticated businessman, and a relentless preservationist, Shaw lived with one foot in the past and the other in a modern world that never quite understood him. Long before he was framed as part of a conspiracy to kill a president, Shaw was helping save New Orleans from losing its soul. He returned from World War II with medals on his chest and a vision in his head, to restore the faded beauty of a city that was all too comfortable with letting its history rot. At 1313 Dauphine Street, Shaw found his canvas. This two-story carriage house, built in 1830 by architect James Gallier, had good bones and the kind of wary charm that Shaw couldn't resist. He bought it in the late 1950s, meticulously restoring its interior and reviving its brick courtyard, shaded by palms and framed in lacework iron. It was his sanctuary, that is until March 1st, 1967, when it became the scene of one of the most controversial arrests in American history.
I am completely innocent. I have no knowledge of any conspiracy whatsoever to kill President Kennedy or anyone else.
That day, New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison had Shaw arrested, accusing him of being part of a shadowy cabal that orchestrated the assassination of John F. Kennedy. The case was built on paranoia, Cold War fear, and a ghost of a name, Clay Bertrand, which Garrison insisted was Shaw's secret alias. The evidence was weak, the motives murky, and the trial became a national spectacle.
Well, it certainly is not the pleasantest thing in the world to understate the case, to find yourself charged with the most heinous crime probably of our times.
In 1969, a jury of his peers took less than an hour to acquit him, but the damage was done. Shaw had been made a symbol of something he never was.
It is a matter of some concern that my constitutional rights have, I think, been seriously violated. There are, of course, remedies for that which can be taken in due time. Meanwhile, however, this case, is a matter of great concern because of these violations. It's a matter that should concern every citizen of the United States. It has been well said by a distinguished American that all men's rights are diminished when any man's rights are threatened. And I think that expresses the case very well.
Who said that?
President John F. Kennedy said that.
Yet he never stopped loving the city. He moved here to 1022 St. Peter Street, a double Creole cottage from the 19th century that he preserved with the same care he gave everything. Tucked into the back of the quarter, this house became his final home. He died here in 1974, quietly, of lung cancer. No drama, no crowds, just the end of a man who had already survived way too much. Further down the corner, at 724 Governor Nichols Street, stand the Spanish Stable, one of the few surviving structures of its kind from the 1830s. Shaw saved it too. Today, a plaque near the door honors his work, not as a defendant, but as a steward of New Orleans' architectural legacy. It's a small, firm rebuttal to the whispers that chased him through the last decade of his life. He also left his mark on the Audubon cottages at 509 Dauphine Street. The row of 19th century buildings, now luxury accommodations, still carries his fingerprint in the ironwork and careful masonry. Shaw didn't just preserve the buildings, he resurrected them, made them breathe again, in a city that too often paves over the past to make room for the present. And while his preservation work was his quiet legacy, Shaw was no recluse. He was worldly and articulate, fluent in multiple languages, and always impeccably dressed. In 1947, he co-founded the International Trademark, helping turn New Orleans into a global business hub. He dreamed big, for himself, for the city, and for its place on the international stage. But history didn't remember him that way. Not at first. For years, his name was buried under Oliver Stone's dramatizations and late-night conspiracy specials. But his real legacy, the one you can touch and walk through, lives on. In tribute to Clay Shaw, 1913 to 1974. This 1834 building, the Spanish Stables, is one of 9 restorations by Clay Shaw. In addition, he conceived and completed the International Trademark and directed the restoration of the French market. Clay Shaw was a patron of the humanities and lived his life with the utmost grace. An invaluable citizen, he was respected, admired, and loved by many. In 1825, New Orleans stood at a cultural crossroads. Though Louisiana had entered the Union in 1812, the city still pulsed with French language and customs. At the heart of civic life stood the building we now call the Cabildo. In the 1820s, locals knew it more commonly as City Hall, or in the parlance of Creole residents, the Hotel de Ville. The older Spanish name, Cabildo, a holdover from colonial days, remained in informal use, especially among those with roots in the city's Spanish-era institutions. The building served as the seat of municipal government. It housed the mayor's office, the city council chambers, and administrative offices. But for 5 days in April 1825, it became something else entirely. It became the Hotel Lafayette, the temporary residence of one of the most revered figures in both French and American history.
Everyone give it up for America's favorite fighting Frenchman!
The Marquis de Lafayette arrived in New Orleans on April 9, 1825, as part of his grand farewell tour to the United States. In advance of his visit, city officials spared no expense in transforming the second floor of the Cabildo into a space worthy of his stature. They redecorated the rooms with new wallpaper, draperies, carpets, and chandeliers, furniture, silverware, fine china, and linens, many borrowed from the city's wealthiest families, were brought in to create a setting that blended comfort and honor. What made Lafayette's time in New Orleans especially complex is the tension between who he was and where he was. Lafayette was a committed abolitionist. He saw slavery as incompatible with the ideals of liberty and human dignity for which he had fought in both the American and French revolutions. In the 1780s, he purchased land in Cayenne, modern-day French Guyana, to test a motto of gradual emancipation. He wrote to his close friend, President George Washington, urging him to free his enslaved people and lead by example. Lafayette's position was clear and widely known. By the time of his U.S. tour, his anti-slavery stance had become part of his legend. Ironically, many of the Southern elites who feted him in New Orleans were slaveholders themselves, saluting liberty with one hand while profiting from bondage with the other. Precise names of those who served Lafayette are lost to history, but it's clear that a mix of city officials, trusted municipal staff, and French-speaking locals were assigned to attend to his needs. These aides likely handled everything from ceremonial coordination to basic hospitality, ensuring that Lafayette experienced the best of Creole civility. The irony of elite slaveholders waiting on every need of a world-renowned abolitionist could have been lost, but like so much of the history of the French Quarter, made sense at the time. Thank you for watching. If you're hungry for more of the strange and beautiful chaos that is the Gulf Coast, we got a podcast now, over on Patreon. And if you haven't hit that subscription button yet, now's the time. Don't overthink it, just do it. Until next time, folks, this is Gulf Coastal Connections. Stay curious, stay hungry, and stay salty.